So next we have Jay Graham, and he's going to be presenting on So You Want to Fix and Restore Your Apple II. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, so today what I'd like to do is we all have this old equipment sitting at home, and some of it's, old, and it's on its last legs. So I'm going to talk about some of the repair techniques that I have here. One of the things that I just wanted to say about KansasFest this year, it is so exciting to see more and more people without gray hair. It really is. It's unbelievable because, I know when I had my Apple II, it was a couple of decades ago. It was definitely, it was definitely something that I never thought would have lasted this long, but it did. And again, the other thing is the collaboration between this group is just phenomenal because I've seen it, and I love coming here. This is my third one. I'm planning on coming to many more, but I just wanted to say that. So let's get into the presentation. I'm not an electrical engineer, but I did stay at Holiday Inn Express last night. So one of the things that I want to talk about here is some of the tips and tricks of repairing these beasts. And it is unbelievable. My wife's in the back there. She's listening to the presentation. She knows how many Apple IIs I have at home. But it's unbelievable the variety of motherboards, keyboards, and parts that they've used in these things. So it's, every time when you think you've seen them all, you open up another one and it's like, never saw that in there. So today what I want to talk about is part one, the toolbox, some of the tools that you're going to need. Now, if you're doing this just on a casual basis, you don't need to get crazy with the tools. You can get crazy with the tools real easy if you're doing this a lot. I've gotten crazy with the tools. I know my wife helped me carry them in there. She goes, "You do have a lot of tools in there." So I'm going to break it up into 3 tiers here today. And the first tier is going to be the essential things that you need to get started. The second tier is going to be the nice to haves, and the third tier is going to be the wild and crazy things that you may or may not need unless you really, really get into fixing these and repairing a lot of these. The second part I want to talk about today is the teardown. How to take them apart. It's interesting because they all come apart differently. There's some tricks that you need to know to get them apart without breaking any of the case parts or keys or any of those types of things off. I'll talk a little bit about that today. Part 3 would be troubleshooting and diagnostics. And there are a lot, so how do I know what's broken? When I flip the power switch on, how do I know what's broken? Finding parts. A lot of the parts that are, and I'll show you a chart here when we get to the end of the presentation. A lot of the parts are easy to find still. There are some which are, they call it LSI or large scale integration, or ASIC, application specific integrated circuits. They're getting harder and harder to find. And I'll give you some places and sources where you can find that stuff. And then I'm going to do a demonstration of one that I bought off of eBay. I have not touched it, have not turned it on, I promise. The only thing I did is it had a clock card in it. I took the battery off of it because I didn't want the battery exploding on my 800-mile journey here in the back seat. So we're going to actually turn this on. It could be a real short demonstration of everything's working, or hopefully there's something broken on it, and if there is, then we'll make the fix. So the toolbox overview. So what tools do you need? And again, I said essentials tools, user and desirable tools, and one of the things that I'll do at the end, and I'll put a QR code up here, is I have a box folder that has all of the materials, most of the materials that I'm going to talk about today will be in that box folder. So if you grab that QR code at the end, you'll be able to get PDF scans of a lot of the things that I'm talking about today. And I did kind of a cost estimate sheet for these tools that are up there with ranges. So, from where to get it. Obviously, Amazon, Genico, some of those places, they all have all the tools. So, the essential tools. You need a multimeter. Now, when you buy a multimeter, You don't really need a $500 Beckman multimeter to troubleshoot with these things. So, you know, if you go down to your local Radio Shack, or if they even exist anymore, all you really need is a multimeter with you know, a voltage range on there. I like the ones with the audible tone on it for continuity. Because then you can, you can set it up on the bench, and you can definitely just you know, just listen to it with the continuity. This is the one I have. It's probably as old as the Apple II, but bought it many years ago. A utility knife, you need that for cutting and those types of things. Shear cutters, these are for cutting electronic parts off at the circuit board from the surface mount. Wire strippers for stripping wire. Electronic ESD safe tweezers. So you'll need a set of tweezers, and I have all these up here. If you, after the session during lunch or whatever, when you come back, I can show you a lot of the stuff that I have in the toolbox there. And you want ESD safe tweezers, because if you're picking up some of the parts, a lot of them aren't static sensitive, some of them are, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Needle nose pliers, obviously. A good soldering iron. If you can get a variable heat soldering iron, that's probably better than a single heat. The one I have has a switch that has high heat and low heat that I'll be using today. There are some, though, that have a control knob on it that you can control the temperature a little bit more finer than the one that I have. Solder, some rosin core solder. There's 60-40 combinations, 60% tin, 40% lead. They do make lead-free solder. I haven't tried it. I don't know if anybody here's tried it. I don't know whether it works any better or the same than the solder that contains 40% lead. Solder sucker is a good thing to have. They make vacuum type ones. I'll show you one today that's actually heated and vacuumed, so that it actually has the iron and the sucker in one tool. Soldering iron tip cleaners. These are good to have to clean the soldering iron. If you don't want to buy one, you can put steel wool in a little Tupperware container, and it works just as well. Desoldering braid or desoldering wick. This is usually copper, and it's braided. Looks like a braided ground wire, and you heat that up, and that'll actually pull the solder off of the board into the wick. Good electrical tape. Don't buy the cheap stuff. You need really good stuff. Again, a real good roll of electrical tape will probably cost you $1 or so. Screwdrivers. This is critical. If you do this a lot, if you're just fixing a few of them, you don't really need a good screwdriver. If you're fixing a lot of them, you need a good screwdriver. You will wear the tips out on the Phillips screwdrivers faster than anything else on these, and then it'll start stripping on the power supply screws or the case screws or whatever. So if you're doing a lot of them, and I'll leave up to your imagination what a lot of them are, you need a pretty good screwdriver. An X-Acto knife. Super glue. I'll tell you why you need a super glue in a minute. It's actually for gluing some of the feet back on and so forth. Small brush set, ESD safe for brushing the dust off of the motherboard. A small steel ruler if you have to measure some parts. Alligator clip leads, if you need this for troubleshooting. You can use these as jumpers between circuits and things like that if you need to test and eliminate some parts that may have an issue. Canned air is a good thing to have as well. 30 American wire gauge solid wire. This is for jumper wires. What'll happen sometimes when you're soldering on these things, some of them are 30, 40 years old, the traces will lift off of the motherboard. So if that happens, or you sever a trace on the motherboard, you can use this 30 AWG wire that's solid to do a jumper. You can solder it onto the component, and then actually solder it onto the motherboard, and it'll actually replace the trace if you have a cracked trace on there. You might have seen these on some of the cards that you've gotten where they've done fixes, retrofitting cards and so forth after after the fact, and that's the kind of wire that you'll see on there. You can also use this for wire wrap. Nylon wire ties in the apple colors. Hemostats is also another good thing to have. The hemostats for clamping things and picking things up if you need to solder. Lineman scissors. Now these are a little different than your regular scissors that you may have at home for cutting paper. This is actually for cutting wire. These things are really sharp and they really keep their sharpness when you're cutting wire. And some of them even have a little built-in stripper up there where you can actually strip the wire. Helping hands tool. This is for holding circuit boards or holding parts while you're soldering them. None of us have 3 or 4 hands, so these are a very good investment if you're soldering. Anti-static wrist strap is something that you should have. Again, some of this stuff is not static sensitive at all. Some of it is. Tends to be the harder to find stuff is static sensitive. Useful tools. Some of the useful tools that you may need, these are nice to have. Precision screwdrivers. There's not really precision screws on the Apple II until you get into some of the mechanics of the disk drives and if you're really getting into tearing things apart. Calipers for measuring things and distances. Tin snips. A universal crimp tool if you need to crimp some stuff. A soldering station, and this is if you're really going overboard. The soldering iron, I tend to use that probably 90% of the time. There is sometimes where I'll use the soldering station. If you're into the newer Macs or the newer cards that have the surface mount technology on it, this actually has a hot air gun on there where you can desolder and solder surface mount devices. Tip tinner. These, believe it or not, these are pretty expensive, but these come in really handy. The old way to tin it, sand the tip, get a little bit of solder, and it'll stick to the tip. Small pan of ice for holding smaller circuit boards, things such as that. Magnifying work lamp. I really need one of these. I wish I would have brought it with me. Yeah, I can't see anymore, so these are very nice. They have a light on them and they have a magnifying glass, 4 power, 8 power magnifying glass in it for looking at small work. Heat gun. They actually make heat guns that are like handheld, and I actually found one in a hobby shop I'll show a little bit later here. It's about $19, and you need that for heat shrink tubing, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. Test clips with hook probes on it. Heat shrink tubing in various colors. This is the heated solder sucker that I talked about that I have today. It actually is the iron and the vacuum all in one thing. They work really good because you don't have to sit there and try to balance the soldering iron while you put the vacuum on there. It's all in one tool. Digital logic probe. Again, not necessary for if you're just tinkering around with them. If you're starting to troubleshoot the circuitry on there, these come in very handy. Obviously, everybody knows isopropyl alcohol. You don't really, 90% is fine, 99% if you want to buy that. It gets a little expensive at the 99%. Mini hacksaw. Spudgers, probes, and picks. If you're taking apart an Apple IIc, these come in real handy. Small rotary tool if you need it. Basically what I use this for is some of the chips that you have. You may pull them out and the pins on the chips are going to be corroded. So you can use this with a polishing tip on it, and you can sometimes very carefully polish the pins on the chips. High wattage soldering iron. These are good to have if you're working on like the power supplies. The power supplies have pads on them that are humongous because they have to dissipate a lot of electricity and a lot of heat. You're not going to get those with a 40 watt or a 50 watt soldering iron. You may need this to desolder some of those. Some of the desirable tools, Torx driver set, especially if you're working on some of the Macintosh stuff. They actually make a long Torx driver that'll fit into the back of the single unit Macs. IC chip extractor, chip inserter, a nibbling tool. These are great if you have to, nibble around some metal or so forth. It cuts metal pretty quick, pretty close and pretty square, so you don't have to sit there and try to, tin snip it or whatever. A glue gun is good to have because it's just good to have a glue gun. And breadboard or proto board if you're playing around and getting serious with some of the testing and so forth. Thin desoldering braid. The desoldering braid comes in thick and it comes in thin. This is good. The thinner stuff is better if you're getting a smaller and smaller electronic components. It's a lot easier to get into the work, and it's a lot it heats up a lot quicker and draws the solder off.
You have that instead of the regular or both?
I'd do both. This is for the real small components, and if you're doing surface mount stuff, you would want this. The other stuff is going to be good for, desoldering chip sockets and things like that. Solder roll holder. So if you don't have this, you're pulling your solder and the roll goes on the floor and across the room. These are very handy. They're not that expensive. I don't know why I put it in the desirable, but it actually is a dispenser for the solder. A desoldering station. These get to be pretty expensive. If you're not doing this with a million Apple IIs, this is overkill. They are nice though. I used to fix Atari games back when I was going to college, Atari 2600s and so forth, and we had one of these. It was great for desoldering the soldered on chips. Smaller diameter solder, a large printed circuit board holder that'll hold the Apple II board, and a portable oscilloscope. A small air compressor is handy to have. I'm sure you've opened these things up and you've seen dust bunnies all over the place in there. A small air compressor that you can adjust the air on is really, really nice in getting it out. The canned air sometimes just doesn't get it all. It doesn't have enough oomph. Smaller air compressor. Don't turn it up all the way, but turn it up, 20 or 30 psi, and you can get almost all the gunk out between the keys on the keyboard. And then I have an IC lead forming tool. And these are nice if the IC leads get bent, or if you buy new ones, the IC leads on new chips are spread out like this, which won't go into the socket. So there's a trick where you can bend it on the table, but if you overbend it, then you're gonna, definitely bend a pin. These are neat to have. There's two sides of this. One for the smaller dips or dual inline package, and then you flip it over, and there's one for the larger ones. This is an older metal style. I haven't seen any of those around for ages, so those were nice. We had those back when I was fixing the Atari games, but these you can actually still buy today off Amazon or whatever. Okay, so essential tools are all you need to get started. Useful and desirable if you're really getting serious into this. Costs will vary. Some of this, so shop around. It's not like just go to Amazon. Amazon had really good screwdrivers, but they were about $5 or $10 more expensive than going to Lowe's and getting them. And don't scrimp on some of the tools. So the soldering iron you don't want to scrimp on. That's one of the things. Electrical tape you don't want to scrimp on. So some of that stuff you don't want to scrimp on. Okay, next is the teardown. So here we're going to actually learn how to take apart the various Apple systems, the Apple II, Apple II Plus, the 2E and the Enhanced Platinum, the 2C and the 2C Plus, the 2GS. Now, up on that box site, when you get this code at the end, I've actually excerpted the teardown sessions from all of the service manuals. I've taken out the teardown part of it, and I have those in a folder so that you don't have to go rooting through the whole big 700-page manual just for the take-apart guides. They're there from how to take the screws out of the case to how to put it back together. Okay, so the Apple II Plus basically has 4 screws along the bottom. You'll see 4 along here, and then 1 in each of the corners up there. Now, with the Apple II Plus, be careful of the speaker foam. It's probably disintegrated if you've got it, but if you have it in there, the Apple II and the Apple II Plus actually had the speaker glued to the metal tray, and it had foam around it that's probably long since disintegrated. If it hasn't, be careful with that. Don't use chemical cleaners on the cases. The cases for the Apple II and the Apple II Plus and even the early Apple IIes were painted. They weren't that molded plastic, so no retro bright on those. Be careful with the nylon standoffs on the motherboard. When you take the motherboard out, there's some nylon standoffs, and if you're putting the motherboard back in, you can break those. They're brittle. You can bend them and break them pretty easily. And there's a 5/16 inch nut in the middle of the Apple II and Apple II Plus motherboard. Don't over tighten them or you will crack the motherboard. And there's an aluminum bar in the rear. The first time I took a few of these apart, that thing fell out and it is really challenging to get back in. You don't need to take those screws out. The motherboard will come out without those. And then we're moving the keyboard. That had the 16-pin dip or dual inline package. Use an IC puller if the cable's tight or corroded. Some of them that I've done have been so corroded that you just can't pull them out. They've actually corroded into the socket. So I get an IC puller and I very carefully wiggle it back and forth. And then it usually comes out. Take the shift key off if you're popping the power light off. All right, the Apple IIe. The Apple IIe, you'll see there's 4 screws across the bottom on the earlier models. Or on the later models, there's only 3, and then it has 4 up on the case. Again, with this, be careful of the nylon standoffs. There are 2 types of speaker clamps on these. There's no foam to worry about here, but there's 2 types of speaker clamps. One of them looks like this. You don't lose those as easy. The other one are 2 crossbars that go across like that. If you get in there and you flick that, those things have a lot of tension on them, and they'll fly across the room, and you'll be looking for them. So just be careful when you're taking those clamps off. Make sure your keyboard ribbon cable is tight during reassembly. I've had this happen a lot of times where somebody will get it, they'll turn it on, and it'll be going through the self-test. And if you don't have the ribbon cable on, it'll go through the self-test. Now, the newer Platinums, it was soldered onto the keyboard, so the ribbon cable could only come out in one spot, and that was on the motherboard. But the earlier models, if you put it in the motherboard and it's super tight there, you might have pulled it out of the keyboard, so you want to make sure and check both places. And the Platinum IIe, again, is different. It has a keyboard grounding tab on it. It's a small part that you don't want to lose. It's on the screw on the lower right-hand corner of the keyboard when you're taking the keyboard off. The 2C and the 2C Plus, they're different. They have different amounts of screws on them. And with these, they are slightly different. I use a plastic spudger, and I'll show you what those are to remove the cover. First time I took the cover off of an Apple IIc, it was like that cartoon with the monkey. You're sitting there trying to pull it off, and it didn't come off, and I was getting real frustrated. Then, actually, I found a way with the plastic spudger. If you just pry under the front of it, pops it right off. Be careful of the switches and cables. The Apple IIcs are dense packed with there are a lot of cables and a lot of switches on there. There are caps on the switches on the Apple IIe that if you pull the cover off, because of it being 20 years old or whatever, there's a lot of grunge on it, and the cap will actually come off with that, and then you'll end up losing it or dropping it. And then watch the back cover where the ports are located. That actually will pop off if you're not careful, and you'll be super gluing it back on because those little plastic tabs will break. The 2GS, the good news is it's very easy to take apart. The bad news is that plastic is so brittle on those tabs that if you press in, you're going to break them off. Be very, very careful with these, especially the ones that really need retrobrighted and the ones that are yellowed. Those are, I know Charles, I watched one of his videos here. He had where he tried to fix that on those, and it was almost impossible. I don't know if he ever succeeded with it, but boy, they put a lot of torque on there, and if they break off, they're done. The case will still close, and you'll be fine. It's just you'll be without a tab on the back. Use care when removing the cover. There are plastic tabs on the front too. Be careful when removing the motherboard. More plastic tabs. They're wee little, and they break off. And then be careful removing the power supply. There's yet another big plastic tab on it. The nice thing is you really don't need any tools. You can kind of take them apart without tools. Okay, diagnostics. What I want to talk about here are some of the diagnostics. There are internal diagnostics, external hardware, disk-based diagnostics, and then some troubleshooting tips. And I'm going to point you to some guides, books, and manuals, and they are all out on the box folder out there. So if you go out there, all of the PDF scans are out there. Internal diagnostics. So on the Apple IIe, all the way up through the 2GS, they have built-in diagnostics on it. And to get to them, you basically hold down the open Apple and closed Apple key when you power it on. The later ones, it could be the Option key and the Apple key, and you know, in like the 2C Plus and the 2GS. And we'll show you that during the demo. It's rudimentary in the earlier models, like the Apple IIe unenhanced. It's in there, but it's very rudimentary and does very rudimentary checks. The 2GS, the ROM 3s, it's very, very sophisticated, and it'll walk through a set of probably 15 different diagnostics. So it got better in the later models. It checks basically the RAM, the MMU, the IOU, ROM, the GLU on the 2C. So it does a kind of a test of those. Now it has to power up. If it doesn't power up, this isn't going to work that well. And as I mentioned, the 2GS diagnostics are pretty sophisticated. So the external hardware diagnostics. Apple made a card for the 2E, and I think it was the earlier 2Es. I haven't tried this on a Platinum yet, but I'm betting the ROM routines in here aren't going to work on the Platinums. But basically the card had two ROMs on it. It had diagnostics built on it. You put it in a slot, and there was a toggle switch up here, and when you switch the switch in one direction, it would run some external diagnostics off of the card. When you put it in the other direction, your Apple IIe would boot up normally. The other thing, James has these that he, back there, he actually found these on eBay. I don't know if you've ever tested these to see if they work or not. But these were diagnostics that I believe they used at Apple when they were testing the boards on the line. So hence the handles on there. You won't see those on things that they gave to the dealers, and those are look like pretty sturdy aluminum handles. So James Littlejohn has these, all of the cables that go with it in the manual. Go out there and look at it. The manual is real interesting on these. So disk-based diagnostics, there are many to choose from. And one of the things when you're looking for those diagnostics, it may be specific to the make and the model, and there are a variety of features in the diagnostics. So with the disk-based diagnostics, the ones that I typically use are Master Diagnostics 2E and 2C. Yes, the disk images are up on the box folder, so you don't have to go looking for these. AP Test, Apple Cillin, Apex Diagnostics, the MEC, the MEC Computer Inspector, and XPS Diagnostics 2E. And there's a real good write-up that Stephen Buggy did on diagnostics that's about a decade old, maybe 2 decades old now. And I have the link in there for that, and then I have the link to the disk images on there. The presentation is also up on the box folder. So next is the troubleshooting guides. I'm doing good on time here. Sam's Computer Facts. Those were phenomenal back in the day. I have a few real copies of those at home, but luckily they've scanned them all and they put them up there. The real copies are nice because they actually folded out and you could lay them down and you could see the circuit board and so forth. The entire circuit board. The PDFs kind of have to scan them one at a time there. There are a lot of good books out there, and there's a lot of good user-provided diagnostics and troubleshooting. So these are the Sam's Computer Facts. So you can see this is just a sample. There's one for the Apple II and II Plus, the 2E, the Disk 2 drive, the Image Writer printer, and then the Apple IIc. And these are what they look like inside. They actually have, you know, the settings for the oscilloscopes. They have troubleshooting tips. They have take-apart guides and so forth in there. They're very, very good. Obviously, there's a bunch of books out here. And this one you definitely heard about yesterday when Brian gave his talk. That's more for programming and not a lot for diagnostics, but there are a few tips and tricks in there. Actually, Chilton, who makes all of the auto repair manuals, made a manual for the Apple II. The understanding the Apple IIe and the inside the Apple II series are really good too. And then Sam's also has a troubleshooting guide. So not only did they do the computer facts and the single sheets, they did a troubleshooting guide. And this is just some of the inside of what the books look like. And then you have the official service manuals, and there were actually some of these in the garage giveaway up there I saw. So these are the official manuals that Apple gave you. Now the only thing that I really don't like about the Apple service manuals, they do have troubleshooting charts in there, but it's like try this, try that, and if that doesn't work, swap the motherboard. So if you try the first two things and it doesn't work, you know, you can't swap the motherboard anymore because, you know, the Apple's not going to swap them, so you're kind of stuck on these. They're really good in some areas, but in other areas, basically especially when they got up to the 2Es, they were just swapping motherboards and not doing board level repairs. And you know, some of the parts were actually soldered on there. So you'd send, you know, if you were a dealer, you would, you know, try to fix it. If you couldn't, you sent the motherboard back to Apple. They fixed it and you put a new one in. And then there's some good user-provided manuals out there, and I have, you know, Mike Willigal, who's been here at KansasFest or two. He has some really good troubleshooting tips out there, and then there's some chip swapping guides and hardware. So diagnostics: be careful when taking them apart. Don't lose any of the parts. Use the guides that are available. Some of them are very useful. Diagnostics will help narrow it down. Troubleshooting is mostly a skill, but there is an art to it as well. And I'll talk a little bit about this later. Now the parts overview. I'll try to go through these pretty quickly. Obviously I wanted to talk about the capacitor problem, the 7400 series logic, some of the custom ICs, and then where do I find parts. Everybody probably knows about these. The capacitor problem, the leaky capacitors. And I have a few pictures of some really dramatic ones here. And one of the problems that happens, these will leak. The electrolyte in them will surround the chips. It is conductive, and you can see that that's a surface mount chip. It's going to short that baby out, and then you got a nice repair job there. There's one leaking from the top. All right, a lot of the chips within the Apple are 7400 series, and this is TTL, or transistor logic. These chips were designed and made in the late 60s and the early 70s. The reason it's transistor, there's transistor, there is resistor transistor, and diode transistor. Basically, it was what on that wafer of silicon, what were they going to etch on there? Here they did them all with transistors instead of etching a diode on there or etching a resistor on there. So the TTL logic became very, very reliable. Was originally designed to perform basic logic functions like AND, OR gates, NOT, XOR gates, and now contains hundreds of devices. There's flip-flops, shift registered, arithmetic logic units, and so forth. So there was also a military variant of it, which was the 5400 series. Basically, it was a higher temperature. You could use them at a higher temperature, and they were mil-spec. So how's the numbering scheme work on this? Well, the numbering scheme is pretty simple. So if you look at a chip, you'll see something that'll look like this whole big string of numbers here, and you know, it's real easy to decode. So the first thing is typically the manufacturer. In this case, SN is Texas Instruments, DM is National Semiconductor, MM is Fairchild, although Fairchild did use DM at one point, and so, but again, that typically would designate the manufacturer. The next would be the temperature range. The 74 are the commercial ones that were available, 54 were the military, and they had a short run of 64, which was industrial. The next is the logic series, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. then the device number, and then the package type or the quality grade. So if you look at these, you can use this to decode what the chip is. So the logic series basically is 0 to 4 letters, and it has designation like HCT, for example, is high speed compatible. You may see LS there, which is low power. So here's a SN7404. So Texas Instruments, commercial grade, and the device number is an 04, and this just happens to be a hex inverter. If you have a logic a book on this, or if you go to the web and you look up the TTL logic, you'll get on the spec sheet. You'll get a diagram of how the pins are laid out. Now the ASICs and the ROMs. The Apple II and the Apple II Plus, you'll see has very few. Whoops, flip back there a minute. Basically, it was the AppleSoft basic ROMs or integer, the character generator, and the programmer's aid ROM if you had that. Everything else in there, there might be some PALs, programmable array logic, in there. You can still get them. You may have to program them, but and I think on the Apple II and II Plus there really weren't any. So most everything, if you see on the board, is all commercial off-the-shelf components. Then we moved on to the 2E and the Enhanced Premium. You see they've added a few more. The MMU, the IOU, the keyboard, the video ROM, the CD and EF ROM chips, and the TMG DRAM video, the timing generator are all application specific. Then as you see with the 2C and the 2C Plus, even more. And then finally, the 2GS, which is pretty much almost all application specific, except for the RAM maybe. But you'll see that the big long list of chips there. And then the Apple III, I just threw that in there. It had a keyboard controller and 11 other ROM and PROM chips that were on there. In my presentation, I have a complete list of all of the ASICs and the chips that are available, and the ROM chips that are available at this site. So I included that in there. And then I have a large listing of the Apple ROMs and the part numbers on this site. So you can, if you find one in your Apple and you see the 341 dash whatever, you can go to that list and look it up. Now, where to find them? eBay is one source. So if they do make the ROM chips available, people to pull them out, and they may pull the MMUs out and so forth. You're going to pay a lot for them there, but you might be able to get a good deal there. DigiKey is a really good source. DigiKey Electronics, they have a lot of the parts. Apple Rescue of Denver. Dr. Ken B's Apple Store, he seems to overcharge there, but he's got some parts as well. Unicorn Electronics, which is near me in Pennsylvania, and they have some of the hard to find parts. Arcade Components, they basically, you have to hit them right. They'll get some of the application specific stuff in stock. They're not terribly expensive, so if you need a chip, that's another place to look. And then obviously here. So the parts wrap up. Capacitors are going to be an issue. It's not maybe, they will be an issue, particularly in the power supplies, the monitors, and those types of things. The motherboard, not so much. Know your 7400s, because now you'll be able to look at one of the chips on there and kind of know what that 7400 means. Custom ICs are the most difficult to find, and there are still some good parts finding resources left. Okay, any questions at this point? And then I'm going to move over here to the demonstration. Oh, yep.
It's not a question but a comment. On the 2GS, about 10 of them were given away upstairs. I predict that when you get them home and you hook them up, half of them will fail the internal self-test. But the most likely thing that's going to fail the self-test is going to be the PRAM BIOS battery that runs the settings and the clock. So if it goes through the self-test and says system bad, look at the battery that's in there. If it's one of those Israeli batteries that they put in when the thing was new, it's over 20 years old and very likely dead. So just replace that battery and I would guess 3/4 of them that say system bad are going to be system good with a new battery.
Yeah, and those batteries are still available too, so you can get them online. Even the axial lead ones and the older one, Apple II GSs, you can get them online. And obviously, you know, the ones that are in the ROM 3s that are in the little plastic case. Little hint: be careful taking that plastic case off that's on the battery on the 2GS. There's a little case that'll fit over it. The way I do that is I go to the top and the bottom of the battery with a fine bladed small screwdriver, and you ever so gingerly bend it out and it'll pop loose, and then you do it on the other side and it'll pop loose. Otherwise, the plastic tabs on there will break off and you won't have a battery retainer clip on there. Okay, so what did I do for the demo? I went out to eBay and I bought this. I haven't touched it until I brought it to KansasFest here. The only thing I did was there was a battery on, like I said, on the clock card. I removed that so that didn't explode. It was dead. I didn't want to have any issues. Robin's been driving around the last 4 days out to the zoo and everything. This has been sitting in the back in the heat. I don't know if it's broken or not. We'll try it. First time here. But this is actually what I bought. It had 2 disk drives. It was an Apple IIe. The thing that really intrigued me about it was that it had some cool cards in there. A clock card, it had a Lyron card in it, and it had one of the Slinky RAM memory cards in there as well with the Super Serial. So, yeah, that was a pretty good find for $107, I thought. So that's it, and we'll put that up at the end. So, so what I'm going to do is I'll flip over to here, and this is the unit that I have here. And I actually have one of the diagnostic cards, so we'll see if we need to use that. So the first thing I typically do when I get one of these is I pop the cover and see what's inside. And there have been some interesting things inside from eBay. Most interesting thing I found in there was a bag of pot in one of them. It was stuck under the keyboard, and there was a bag of pot in there. So it was like, so I guess he must have used his Apple IIe to stash his stash back in the day. So I open it up. It looks pretty interesting in here. Let me see if I can do this and see if I can get the camera on here and. So that you can see what I'm looking at. Let's see. All right. Launch. QuickTime here. All right. Let's see. See if that'll do it. Finger out of the way. All right, so if I look in the case here, you'll see that there's nothing, no bag of pot. Right? So, okay, good. So, so you'll see in here that the cards are in there. You'll see that there's a RAM chip. It looks like it's already been replaced up front here. Okay, so we'll see what that is. So the first thing I'll typically do when I open them up is I'm going to check them. And then I'm going to actually just take it apart here. So to take it apart, what I'll do is I'm going to pop all of these cards out of here, if I can get them. There's the memory card. There's the mouse adapter. There's the clock card without the battery.
You don't let the PC plug?
The what? What's that?
You don't let the Apple II plug to the ground?
No. Yeah, I should have discharged with that, but I didn't. But so it probably is broke now, right? So obviously there are these things on the back. Those hex connectors. The best way to get them off is with a little nut driver. I usually take one out.
The video is.
Yep.
Did I perhaps remove the cable by mistake?
Oh, maybe. Let's see. Oh, that's what happened. Sorry.
I need to touch sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes. There we go. So you'll see that on the connectors here, I just take one of them out and I remove them. All right, do the same thing for the mouse connector here. loosen those. Some of them are a little hard to get out. You want to be careful on these too. There is on the back of there's something that's pressed in there. It's kind of a retainer for the screw. After 30 or 40 years, some of them get hard, they break right off, and then you have a nice thing on getting it back on here. So, all right, let's see if we can get these off.
Jay, what size nut drivers?
This is 3/16. 3/16 for the small ones here. And this one, pop these out. And yeah, I thought it was worth, the Lyron card itself was worth $100, so that's why I bought this. So. Okay, so we'll pop those out, and then we have these connectors, these type of cable clamps on there. They just slip off and slide off of there. Now let's see, get this one. They just slide off like so. This one was a little bit harder to take everything off of because there's a bunch of stuff on there that will pop out. We'll need that for later. Now I'll actually take the Lyron card out.
What's the Lyron card?
Oh, it's the 3.5 inch controller. 3.5 inch disc controller. For the Unidisc. Why does everybody call it the Lyron card? Because it has Lyron on it. So, all right, and then I'll pop the 80 column card out of there. And then I'll go ahead and flip this guy over. And we'll take out the screws here.
You don't want to try it now.
I don't know what's under the motherboard.
Mouse.
Mouse. Yeah, dead mouse. Yeah, I don't know what's under the motherboard. I've gotten a few of them where there's been screws and things that are wedged under the motherboard. You turn them on and it's gone, and you've got a bigger repair than you do. I usually take them all the way apart.
Did the Unidisc 3.5 come with the Lyron card?
It did not. So I brought one though so that we can test it. But see, how am I doing on time? Got 10 minutes here. Let's see, Mario Andretti. We'll take these things apart. So what I typically have for parts as well to hold the smaller parts, we have these little bakery pans. Put a little magnet on them. Drop the screws in there, and we're good to go. Okay, let's lift the case off. Remember I said be careful of the keyboard cable. Keyboard cable's on there, so that's gone. Okay, now to take the motherboard off, there are 4 screws in the back, 4 Phillips screws. We're going to go ahead and loosen those. Can I get this apart and tested in 10 minutes? I hope nothing's broke on it.
We can roll.
Yeah. Alright. And get that screw in there. Okay, those are the motherboard screws. Now, this is where we usually do my needle nose. These nylon, there's nylon standoffs on here. There's a little like tab that'll stick out. You'll see this. When you do this, what you need to do is you basically grab it with a needle nose, and you'll see it'll pop up. Do the same thing here. It'll pop up. You see there's one in the middle. These ones are being a little stubborn. There we go. So I'm going to take a quick look under the motherboard here.
No mouse.
No mouse. No screws, nothing. So, okay. So what I'll do here then is I will put not that controller card back in, put this controller card back in with a single floppy on it. Okay.
You don't use the mouse to try it out.
Yeah, we'll test that here. We'll actually plug this in, and you need a keyboard. So what I usually have is kind of a broken keyboard that I have. We'll put that on here. Okay. Make sure I have no tools in the in the unit itself, and I'll put the power on it here. Make sure the power switch is off. Okay, turn it on. Okay, countdown. 3, 2, 1. Ooh. Hey, it looks like it's working. Now, to be sure, this is where I'll run the internal the diagnostics with the open apple and the closed apple. Uh-oh. All right, well, we have a bad RAM chip. You saw the thing that happened there. Now, this is the least significant bit, so is it this RAM chip or is it this RAM chip? Well, I don't know. Yeah, I did all kinds of interesting things with the keyboard here. So, okay, so let's get the diagnostic card here, and we'll put this in and see if that'll give us any additional. Now it's oh yeah, there we go. So the diagnostic comes up, and this is what it looks like. If you have the switch in the diagnostic position, if you switch it in the other position, it'll come up. So let's do a RAM check on here. What's RAM again? M? M. Okay. This is a little bit better than having the ones. This will actually tell me F06. Now you're probably saying, okay, what's F06? Well, on the Apple II motherboards, they're laid out in a grid with numbers and letters on them. This one is numbered 1 through 14, and then you'll see the letters that are down the side here, which are A through F. Okay? So if we look here for F06, that's this guy right here, I think. 6. And then we look over here and we will see the F. Barely, but that's F6. So it's this guy is the suspect guy. All right. So power down. Let me get my chip extractor over here. If you don't have the chip extractor, small flat-bladed screwdriver will work. Okay. And what you do here is you just get under the chip. Yeah. And there it is. That's probably the bad RAM chip. So let me see if I have a 64K RAM chip in my stash of crap here. And I do. I have a tube of them. Believe it or not, these are still available. You can still buy these on like DigiKey, Jamico, in those places. They usually have a little. See if I can get it out of here now without. How am I doing on time? I got about 7 minutes left. Can I do this in 7 minutes? Probably.
I believe in you.
If I can get the package open here.
I believe in you.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Thanks.
All right. Now, as I told you before, when the chips, when you get them, the legs are kind of spread out on them. So if I try to cram this into the socket now, probably going to bend the pins. That's what this little guy's for. Put the chip in there. Press. And there we go. All right, now there is an orientation to these. You just can't go, well, try it this way, try it that way. Not good. On the chip, there's a little notch. You'll see a little notch on the chip. You look at all of the other RAM chips on there, and you see which way the notch is going. And there we go. You just start it in there. You look and make sure you got it. Then push it down, and you'll hear a crunching noise on it. All right, well, let's see what we got. So, all right, M. F13.
Suspected failure.
Got another RAM failure. Probably this guy. That's the other nice thing about the diagnostics. It's only going to tell you the first one. All right? So, all right. The one I put in is okay. It moved on to the last one on there. Now I just want to make sure I don't put the one with the Apple logo back on there. So we'll grab another one out of here. And we will. If we run out of time, we're not going to, I'll have to repair it during lunch, but F13, that's this guy here. So let's pop him out, throw him over here.
How reliable is that card?
How reliable?
Yeah.
Pretty reliable.
Is it? Okay.
If you can find one, I recommend getting it. It's a lot better than the internal diagnostics, and it's found some stuff that the internal diagnostics haven't.
Can you replicate the card?
Well, there is a project underway that I'm actually probably going to help with on Apple Fritter to replicate the card. So I'm hoping next year that'll be the KansasFest project. So, all right, let's try it again here. All right, what do we think? Cross your fingers. Looking good so far.
So good so far.
It does various different patterns through there. And you'll see that it'll test it at the different memory banks. Yay! All right, now, just so, to be absolutely sure, I'll pop the diagnostics card out, and I'm going to run the internal diagnostics. A little bit different. It'll test some different things, but I just want to, like, this will test the color. You'd have to do the color bar test on the other one to do that. And you'll see this is an enhanced 2E, I can tell, because it says system okay instead of kernel okay. So, two 63-cent 64K RAM chips, and this Apple IIe is working again. Now, what I'd probably do is I would probably look in the power supply. If there's gunk in there, I'd buy one of Henry's power supply update kits on there. But you'll see that a lot of the logic on here, some of the logic is like 7400 series. The things that are custom are obviously the CPU, which you can still get, but I mean that's not really that custom. But the MMU and the IOU, the ROM chip, the keyboard generator, or the keyboard ROM and the video ROM, and you know those are typically the larger chips are the ones that are harder to find. Okay, this one's nice because it's socketed. If you get one like this, it's not socketed. So getting this RAM chip out would have taken a while. We would have had to extend the presentation for a while. You can do it. What you do is you can use one of those desoldering and do it, or the shortcut is if you take a pair of diagonal cutters, you can cut the chip all the way off, pull the plastic package off of there, and then you can heat it and pull the pins out, and then hit it with a solder sucker on there. It takes a little while, but when you hit it with the solder sucker, it doesn't have to heat the pin up because you've actually heated it and pulled the pin out, and it'll actually give you a nice hole. Solder a socket in there and put the chip back in there. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Two, please.
Yeah, it's nice.
Uh,
Yeah.
the first one is the diagnostic card.
The diagnostic card compatible with.
Now can be closed.
Yeah, I think it can. I looked at it. I actually did the parts inventory. It's $20 worth of parts on here. The ROMs are available. The ROMs have been dumped. If not, there's a Rev A of this card and a Rev B of this card. So the Rev B of the card, I don't think of the ROMs are there, but this is a Rev B, so I'm going to donate these to there. They're 2764 EEPROMs, and all of the rest are 7600 or 7400 logic. Like there's a 74. Yeah, I don't know if you can see but you'll see it's all 74 LS logic on there. So I priced the parts out. It's about $20. That switch is even still available from DigiKey. So there's actually I'm actually going to try to work with the some of the people that are on the Apple fritter there and clone those. If you just look at Apple II diagnostics card, and you search for that on Apple fritter, you'll see somebody actually did the silk screen of the back already of the card. So that was what I thought would be a good project for next year at KansasFest. So, so yes.
And the second thing, it's not a question but a comment. 3 years ago, I visited Camp Grabber in Ireland. Camp Grabber is the guy with Apple who did the diagnostic code, which is the firmware for all the Apple II since the beginning. So if you see system okay, that's thanks to it. Then I put on portal.deluxe/public in Apple II and can see firmware source code, everything that may help you in understanding the way the internal diagnostic and the firmware works. So then feel free to download it and get it, read it.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the different functionality of the Rev A and B?
You know, I haven't looked at it yet close enough, but I knew somebody was going to ask that question here, and I was when I was driving out, I'm there. Wonder what the difference is. I don't know. I'm going to actually look at it because I have like 4 of those cards. They weren't available for the longest time, and then somebody on eBay was just dumping them for $45 a
Do you know
piece.
when the cards were made, like when they work on a platinum? Or they
Yeah, they won't work on a platinum. Well, some of this stuff will work on a platinum. The ROM checksums I know are going to be different on the platinum because they are. So if somebody has a platinum, we can try it. I've never tried it. I just bought them all up. I have 3 Rev A's and 1 Rev B. I don't know what the difference is, but I'm gonna. The B, yeah, the B might be for the platinum. Now I heard a rumor that they'll work on the plus too. So, yeah, Brian.
I was just going to say, as long as you're looking at replicating them, consider, if possible, extending it to fully support the platinum, maybe even the GS or the
Yeah.
C or.
Yeah, well, the GS has some really good built-in diagnostics. I don't know if you've seen those.
Yes.
These were the 2E, the unenhanced 2E. I could tell that was an enhanced 2E because it says system OK. The unenhanced ones will say kernel OK, and it'll pop it up here in the upper left-hand corner. Those really come in handy. But I had one with an MMU that was bad, and when I turned it on, I got no video. I put that card in, turned it on. I actually got video, and it said the MMU was bad. So.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and again, it's not the be-all end-all. There's a narrow range of things that it'll work on, but there's enough of the unenhanced 2Es out there, and the enhanced 2Es, but prior to the platinum, that it might be worth it for $20 worth of parts. Yeah, Charles.
You mentioned the switch, the diagnostic versus the mode switch. What are the 2 different modes? You mentioned it and then.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I must have been. Yeah. So there's 2 modes on here. This is transparent, where the card's not even in there, and this is where boots up into the diagnostic mode. So if I flip the switch this way, put it in slot 4 or slot 5, I'll turn it on. It's going to be looking at the disk drive for a floppy. So at that point, okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you proactively recap your boards? Or do you just watch?
So on these boards, the electrolytic capacitors that are leaking are usually, these are the smaller ones here. They're usually not quite as bad because they're low power. The ones where you're going to see the leakage and things like that are on like the Macintoshes with the surface mount ones, the later ones. Apparently this whole capacitor problem, and it's a whole religious war out there on this thing. So the whole capacitor problem started in like the very late 70s, early 80s, and so a lot of the capacitors prior to that were good. These tend to not go bad, again because they're low powered. I've opened up some of the power supplies, and there's just been gunk all inside the power supply, and it smells awful. I mean, it smells like an animal died. When you'll know if you have a leaky one. So yeah, I don't recap them unless they need them. Now the power supplies, I'll probably pop that one open and take a look at it. If there's any signs of leaking capacitors, I'll probably buy one of Henry's kits and update it. Any other questions? Yeah.
If you need help with the card,
Oh, okay. We'll do. Yep.
Only slot 4 or 5?
No, I think you can put it in anything but 7. I haven't tried it in there yet, but I think what I read, it's funny because there's no documentation online for this. These were only given and distributed to the Apple dealers. So. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so they were only given to the dealers, so. Any other questions?
Oh, I just had this picture of one shines. Exactly what you were talking about. Maybe.
Oh, the card?
No, just the power supply wise. This is the worst example I've seen.
Oh.
So
Oh, yeah, there you go.
you see how it's burst and then it's leaked over.
Yeah.
And then that's the lovely
Yeah. When you turn that on, what happens is it's a lovely puff of blue smoke that comes out of there, and the smoke is it's noxious when it comes out of there. So now the other thing I'll do when I get these, the heat over the time might have worked these chips out. So you'll see that I'll when I take the motherboard out, I'm not going to do it here, especially with the power on. But I'll press on these chips when it's down on a surface, and you'll hear that a lot of them will reseat. You'll hear that, as they reseat in there. So, all right.
Jay?
Yeah.
If you get a system where you pull one out of storage you haven't used in a while and you're concerned about the power supply maybe popping, is it better to disconnect it from the logic board and just turn on the power supply by itself?
Well, that's the funny thing about these, since they're switching power supplies. If you turn it on with the power supply out of there, it doesn't actually do much.
Oh.
You actually have to have a load on the power supply because it's a switching one.
But then if it's still connected to the logic board and it pops, can it hurt the logic board?
I've never had one do that. If you want to be on the safe side, if you have an old logic board, because I have a couple of old logic boards that are sitting around that I practice on, plug it into there and turn it on. Yep. Yeah, I've never had one blow the logic board. I've had the power supply. I mean, I've had smoke billowing out of the back where I was afraid the smoke detector was going to go off, but yeah.
So that capacitor you're talking about, the we showed a picture of,
Yeah.
that's the reflow AC filter cap. You can just cut that out. You don't need it.
Right. Right.
So what sometimes I'll do with these power supplies, before I even turn it on, is open it up and just take out the cap.
Yeah.
That'll keep it from smoke.
Yeah, that's the lines capacitor. When I got an Apple III at Goodwill, took it home, turned it on, it worked for 2 seconds, and that cap popped. So yeah, you don't really need it, but they're readily available if you want them. So, any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you.